It's certainly been a while since I've created any Geometry Dash content on this channel. Let's change that today. But not only that, I figured, why not dive into the main levels once again and explore them in a whole new way? One that gives the players something much more challenging to accomplish. While we're at it, let's experiment and answer this eternal question. What is the absolute minimum number of inputs required to complete Geometry Dash? I feel paralyzed. What is going on, ladies, gentle dashers, and dashers of all kinds? My name is Unknown680, and welcome to a brand new Geometry Dash challenge series where we explore each of the main levels in the main game in an effort to determine the minimum number of inputs required to complete it. Before we start diving into the depths of this new challenge, we'll need to establish some ground rules and the groundwork for this challenge. First and foremost, what exactly qualifies as an input? An input is a general term used to describe a click, press, or tap of a button or screen. Many have definitely seen click counter levels used in so many innovative ways all throughout this game, and we're going to be implementing that exact system here today. For the purposes of this challenge, we're going to base an input around the functionality of these counters. According to this system, an input only occurs the moment the player presses down. This is only true at the moment of which an input begins, but not for holding or releasing the press. This is the core principle of this challenge, which is what will determine its outcome. Now, let's set the rules. Number 1. The final tally for the number of inputs in each level will be determined by the in-game counter. Each level's counter follows the player until the end of the level, and the final number that is displayed at the end will determine the number of inputs that specific level requires. Number 2. All paths, coin or no coin, are fair game. The user coins have been removed from each copy for verification purposes, but we are allowed to utilize their path in the events that it does save inputs. Number 3. All legitimate exploits in-game are allowed for use. A legitimate exploit includes any unintended paths that the player can achieve in each main level without the use of any gameplay-altering hacks. In the event that this situation comes up in any of the levels, we'll verify that this exploit is possible to pull off in the main game before proceeding. Finally, we have a few important points to mention. Number 1. The outcomes of this challenge heavily depend on the physics of the game, which varies depending on the player's refresh rate. The majority of players play at 60 Hz, as do I, and therefore we'll be basing this challenge from the perspective of a 60 Hz player. Some of these levels may be impossible for players with other refresh rates, and some refresh rates may actually reduce the number of inputs required as well. It can go both ways, so just be sure to keep that in mind. Number 2. We'll be using unmodified copies of each of the main levels in practice mode, along with colored coin paths that indicate whether to start, hold, end, or tap an input to help visually indicate what you see on screen, as well as a PNG of my trusty green mouse cursor, which will appear on the frames an input is made, again for further visual indication. Number 3. The routes that you'll see in each level are not set in stone and may not be fully optimized. While I've tried to minimize input usage as much as I possibly could, they may be able to be improved further. Updated records will be put in the description and or the pinned comments of each video in this series, so be sure to keep posted there. Lastly, number 4. Inspiration for this series comes from the various click counter levels I've seen when playing various user levels. Specifically, GD:'s level, titled Apostrophe. Little side note here, I found out you could do this section in his level in 3 inputs instead of the intended 4 by holding down preemptively before the ship. It was literally that moment that sparked this idea for this challenge. So thank you GD: for unintentionally making this series a reality. Be sure to go check him out. And with that all being said, let's begin. From humble beginnings. Our journey begins in Stereo Madness. Upon entering the level, we're soon greeted by a single spike and a double spike. Normally, players would simply tap twice, once per jump, right? But what if I told you that you could clear both of these spikes with only one input? That's right. By carefully timing your first jump so that you begin your first input just before the first spike, you can actually hold this input, thereby continuously jumping until you clear the second set of spikes. This jump can be decently tricky to pull off, as there are only a few frames where you can do it successfully. When I discovered this for the first time, I could not believe that the very first jump is already that much more difficult. If this isn't the perfect reflection for how difficult this challenge will make each level to come, I don't know what is. Next, we're approached by a pillar staircase. Simply hold down an input so that you continuously jump on the pillars, and keep holding down this input as you pass the next set of spikes and reach the one block elevated platform. Optimizing the use of each input in this way is crucial towards minimizing the amounts that we'll have to create. So expect to do a lot of continuous jumping in these first few levels. For these next few elevated platforms, this is an example where it's much easier to show than it is to tell. To put it simply, the spikes and platforms are spaced out in such a way that you'll need to do a series of inputs where you'll have to hold and release occasionally as guided by the coin path. Once you reach the next elevated platform, you can hold this input for quite some time until you reach the solid ground at this point. You'll need to release this input upon landing and hold once again when you reach this pair of platforms over spike sets of 4. Simply hold so that your icon continues to clear both sets like so. Begin your next input about half a block away from this wall here. By holding at this point, your icon will continuously jump over each of the spikes and gaps as you make your descent. Once you reach the lowest platform, you'll need to release your current input and begin your next one at the end of the platform, and hold until the one block platform just before the infamous spike that awaits at the top. At this point, you should have 7 inputs heading into the ship section, knowing what to expect out of queue timings for the most part. Now, let's introduce ourselves to the realm of ship inputs. In a nutshell, this challenge takes the concept of straight flying and incinerates it to a crisp. In this challenge, to minimize inputs in all ship sections, we'll need to make use of every ceiling and floor we possibly can, as well as get as close as possible to spike and floor ceilings whenever necessary. Upon entering the ship section, stay along the floor until you reach the first set of floor spikes. When you start your input and fly up, you'll have to release it when you're about halfway up and begin a new input when you reach the halfway point on your way down to avoid hitting the wall below. From here, simply switch from ending to starting to ending an input whenever you see an obstacle. Basically, you'll be switching from heading to the floor and heading to the ceiling. On the floor before the exit section, you'll need to use another input to get your ship onto the elevated floor above, bringing your input total to 11 as you exit into the next icon section. Begin your next input when you approach the next set of pillars and begin jumping along it as you normally would with one input. Coin path or not, the same number of inputs applies. For the next set of pillars, begin your inputs in much the same way. You can actually hold this input for quite some time as you ascend and descend these platforms. You can release your input anytime between the last major gap and when you reach solid ground. As the red background settles in, the difficulty from this point forward starts to ramp up as timings become more difficult. This input isn't so bad, as you simply continuously jump until just before you land on this highest elevated platform. When you drop, you'll need to simply tap on this lower platform, as holding down won't provide the clearance you need to clear these 2 spikes. Once you land back on solid ground, you'll need to start holding down when you're about half a block away from this double spike. You can clear both the double and triple spike in this way. You'll then have to release your input quickly, though, to prepare yourself. What awaits you next is our first precise timing. These timings will be the pinnacle of difficulty in this challenge. If you jump too early, you'll simply hit the spike. If you jump too late, you'll crash into one of these spikes. Jumping at just the right time will allow you to clear the spikes, jump across the pillar staircase, and clear another double spike again. You'll need to end your input here though, as there are these ceiling spike obstacles that prevent the player from jumping anymore. But if you thought that timing was precise, what you're about to witness makes that look like child's play. Right after an already precise timing, we're rewarded with a pixel-perfect timing. You'll need to jump and hold at just the right time, almost 3 blocks left of this spike next to a block so that you land on the block a few pixels to the right of the top left corner of this block. If you jump too late, you won't be able to ascend the staircase. If you jump too early, it'll initially look like your icon is making its way along nicely. You'll ascend the staircase, then take the coin route and die at various points that are suboptimal. If timed correctly though, well, just watch this. Even though we're only in the first level, I'd currently argue that this is one of the greatest highlights of this entire challenge. Every object that RobTop placed, intentional or not, was placed perfectly, allowing this sequence of jumps to be possible. That's over 8 seconds of just holding down. I highly doubt any other inputs in the main game will have any more value than the one we've just witnessed. Now, you can hold down that glorious input all the way until this point right here, in which you'll start another precise jump as your icon starts to slide off this platform. You can hold down this jump until you reach this 4-block wide platform. You'll then need to start another series of inputs with one more input close to the end of this platform, which will carry you into the final ship section. It's also important to mention that when transitioning into a different game mode through a portal, we'll often be holding down our previous input until it's absolutely necessary to release it. This is true for this transition, as you'll be holding the last cube input mentioned earlier, allowing you to grind along the ceiling until a few blocks before you reach the wall. At this point, you'll want to drop onto the blocks below and prepare yourself for your first precise ship timing. You'll then need to wait until your ship is a little over 2 blocks above the spiked floor, angled downward. You'll then want to start your input here so that you fly up into the block ceiling above. Doing this timing too early causes your ship to fly too high, and doing it late causes you to crash into the spiked floor. Keep holding this input until just after your ship starts to angle upward into the spiked ceiling, but release it so that you get as close as possible to it. You'll then land on a 3-block wide platform and want to wait until your ship is angled downward once again. Much like before, you'll need to get as close as possible to the spiked floor to ensure that you have enough distance to reach the ceiling blocks above. Yet again, once you get close to the spiked ceiling, release this input. For this final section, you'll soon be greeted by a situation where there aren't any platforms to coast along, meaning that you'll need to get as close as possible to the ceiling and floor multiple times to minimize the number of inputs you'll need to make. These spike corridors add an additional 2 inputs to our counter. Just make sure that you time them right so that you gain enough distance to land safely on this final block platform that carries you safely to the end of the level. In conclusion, that brings us to a total of 24 inputs required to complete Stereo Madness. I'll be honest, when I was first planning and optimizing these routes, I never could have imagined how difficult this level has become in comparison to the original. In my opinion though, it presents a really cool challenge that forces the player to change up their playstyle and think outside the box to complete these levels successfully. If you'd like to attempt this challenge yourself, you can check out the ID both in the description and right here. These levels contain the coin pass that you see here, as well as a happy little surprise if you just so happen to exceed the input limit. Let me know if you're able to complete it or even optimize it any further by sending me a video. I'm really looking forward to seeing what the rest of the levels have in store for us, and how this challenge will fundamentally change the way we play them. I hope to have each level showcased in its own separate video in this epic new series. If you're looking forward to seeing more of these videos in the future, I hope you'll stay tuned by subscribing to the channel. And hey, while you're at it, you can show your support by giving this video a like. I would tremendously appreciate it. Thank you all so much for watching, and I will hopefully see all of you in the next one. Stay safe, stay healthy, and above all, peace out.